everyone. Welcome to another weekly live stream with Colorism Healing. I am your host, Dr. Sarah L. Webb, and today we have a special guest, Esther, founder of the Black Knowledge Society. She will be joining us shortly, and as people come into the room, be sure to say hello. Tell me your name, where you're watching from, and what the weather is like where you are. Those are usually my 3 questions every time we come on. And I want to tell you a little bit about Esther and why I'm having her join me for a live chat while we await her arrival. So she founded something called the Black Knowledge Society. She's based in the UK, so UK-based online magazine, really. And she reached out to me to have a conversation about colorism, of course. And we did an interview. We ended up talking for like 2 or 3 hours on Zoom, right, with this interview. You can watch it on YouTube. On Instagram, I can't post a link, but on Facebook, there's definitely a link to the YouTube video where there's an edited version of our conversation about colorism. And when I had that first conversation with Esther, I was so impressed by how deep her questions were. I think is how I would describe it. She's a really, really deep thinker, and she's always like asking these like really probing questions about, the issues and about healing. So I'm excited for her to bring some of that energy to you all today. And this time I get to ask her the questions. So I'm excited about that. I don't know if my questions are going to be as good as hers, but I look forward to hearing her responses and for all of you to get to see and experience her brilliance. So definitely check her out, the Black Knowledge Society. Hey, watching from Dakar, Senegal. What's up? Greetings from Brooklyn, New York. Hey, and then, okay, outfit. I love it. You like my outfit, girl? Yes. These are like my spring colors, like yellow and pink, like the pale yellow and pink. I'm really feeling it. Let's see, who else is on here? Oh yeah, so the results for the writing contest. So y'all know I do an international colorism healing writing contest every year, and Sienna, who just complimented me on my outfit, was one of our judges. And so I'm emailing the results on Thursday to my mailing list, right? So if you're not on that mailing list, be sure to check it out. If you want to get the results early, I will post them on social media and the websites and everything as well. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that. So that's going to include the winners of the cash prizes as well as the editor's picks that we want to choose for publication. So that's really, really huge. And then after we announce the results, we're going to be publishing the book, doing a live book launch in August. So a lot of fun stuff to look forward to. Okay, so I see Esther joined. So Esther, you should be able to send a request to join, and then I can respond to your request. I see folks on, so I just did a really, really great healing session with some dark-skinned siblings in Germany, and that was fantastic. And so I see some of them joined the conversation. Thank you all. Made some new friends. So y'all know I've been talking about doing like a world tour forever now. So Berlin is definitely on the list. London, Sydney, Dubai, Vienna, Austria, all these different places that people tune in from. I want to actually meet people in person. Yeah. So let me see. Maybe I can invite you to join. No, I can't. So if you click the top, you see my name at the top left of the screen. If you click on that arrow, you should be able to see request to join. I'm going to send you an invite. It works. Yeah. And if it doesn't work, you might have to go out and update the app. You might have to delete the app and update it or reinstall it. Because I did have there you are. All right.
Hello.
Yay!
Let me just adjust my equipment.
You again.
Okay, I think. Oh gosh, no. Okay, bear with me.
No, you're fine.
Right.
I was people about how brilliant mind is, and I said, now that I'm asking you the questions, I don't know if my questions are going to be as good as yours were
Oh,
last
please. Don't hype this up. They'll
time.
only be disappointed.
Nah. So we'll jump right in. So anyone who's
Sure.
just joining, feel free to type comments and questions in the chat. I'll pose some general questions for Esther, and we'll definitely be taking audience questions as well. And as you are tuning in, also let us know where you're watching from. We'd like to know where folks are located. So Esther,
How are you?
Would you say
How are
how
you?
are you?
You good?
I'm doing great. I was saying I just did finish up like a workshop with some folks in Germany across the ocean. So now I have
Oh,
wanderlust,
nice.
wanderlust, right? I'm like, I
Oh,
want.
yeah.
So more conversation. We're just gonna roll right into another great conversation. We say greetings, Esther. This is life-changing therapy. Good to see you. Got some fans in the house already. You haven't even started.
Nice. Exactly, exactly. Yeah, it's
Um,
nice to know that I'm supported.
you are
This is my first, by the way. This is
your first live ever.
my first ever live. Hence the sort of technical delay in the beginning.
I love being able to share, be a part of that milestone for you. It's an honor.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
So I posted your bio when I announced that we were
Mm,
live, but not everyone read it. So let's start by just having you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you.
cool. So I am Esther Ademosu. I am a mother, a wife. I am a employee. I am a Black woman of African heritage. And yeah, I think essentially I always try and make things as less or as least complicated as possible when doing these kind of introductions. So yeah, not really much to add other than that. You know, I work in international development. It's a space that I am really keen to sort of come away from. And I would also say that, you know, at heart, essentially, I am just somebody who enjoys the creative process. So in a nutshell, that's who I am.
Yes, and I love your hair today too.
Thank you.
Um, so I'll start with the issue of colorism. I know um, one of the things we talked about just now in our previous conversation was that that word has not gained traction all over the world yet in certain places. So whether you knew of this word or not, I'm curious to know at what point in your life did you first become aware that there was an issue like colorism or an issue around people's specific skin tones and hair textures and that kind of thing?
What I failed to say specifically in that intro was that I'm of Nigerian heritage. So to answer your question, because I am circling back to that, is that my first encounter of colorism before it actually became a clear concept in my head was within the Yoruba traditional church. There's a traditional church in the Yoruba culture, which is Aladura, which is where they wear white garments. And I attended one of those churches with my family, and it was very very commonplace actually for a lot of the women to be heavily bleached. And it was actually something that I when I reflect on it, I remember the smell more than anything, you know, of the bleaching, especially when I was in sort of close proximity to these women. And I suppose that at that point, being the age that I was, you know, it I wouldn't say it was something that I was overly conscious of. I had an awareness of it, but just not a consciousness, if that makes sense. So that I'd say that was kind of like my first real encounter of colorism manifesting, in the world around me, and the actors within that space. So in terms of beyond that, I would say, growing up in London in the 80s, I'm sort of giving away my age. So yeah, in the 80s, stroke 90s, I came across just a lot of interesting comments, in the playground with children of mixed heritage, children from Africa, Caribbean. And I think one thing that was very apparent was, that distinction that was made, whether you were from the Caribbean or whether you were from African, what was considered an African heritage. And really, in terms of the way that they would position the good hair, the good features, and the skin tone. So all of those things, I would say, were part of my initial experience growing up of colorism.
Yeah, and have you to observe in London or in the UK in general versus colorism in places?
Sorry, Dr. Sarah, could you repeat that, please?
Have you had the opportunity to observe colorism in the UK or in London specifically? And let me know if I'm muffled because my phone is sitting on the table.
Sure.
Versus how it might be in other parts of the world, or from your perspective, having that international, is there a difference?
Do you know what my perspective is? Is that I think within the UK, the experience is not as overt or as obvious. And I think a lot of that definitely has to do with the history, of how we as a community, as a Black community, came to arrive in the UK. So it's a very, very different experience to say the experience in the US, with your history of slavery, mm-hmm. and so on. So I think, coming here, the first sort of mass concentration of migrants from the Caribbean and then from Africa was more after World War II here. And it was really here to kind of just, try and help to rebuild and restructure what was, a very, very damaged nation at that point. So it was a very, very different experience. And therefore, I think what you generally found was that the Black community tended to sort of group together in a way that is very, very different, because I think in the American context is that you've got a lot more fragmentation, especially, like I said, because of that history with the house Negro and so on and so forth. So I think that is probably the most important distinction to make. I don't know if in the UK though, because interestingly, when we did our Zoom, one of your co-panelists made a comment about the fact that here in the UK, that there didn't seem to be as much as an impact, on the sort of socioeconomic experiences, of those who are, darker skinned. And I wouldn't say that I wholly agree with that. I think unfortunately, when you don't have the research and the statistics to necessarily back up your position, it's very hard, right, to be able to defend that position. But it doesn't make the experience, the lived experience, any less real. I suppose it's just actually finding those who are prepared to do the work of actually the academic research and study around that. So that would be interesting, I think, because I know that in the US there is a growing body of work, more so than there is here, around the impact of colorism.
See, now you're proving right, because you just like very, very informative, and like even just the pacing of the way you talk, it's contemplative,
I've
right?
lost you.
I appreciate and that distinction, because a lot of the other guests I've had on who've taken sort of that international perspective have come from right, and so they do have that history of slavery as well. So it's really interesting, and I actually think you might be the first person of African descent from the UK that I've
Oh,
brought
right.
life. So a lot of my own.
A lot of firsts going on today.
That, this is the first time where we'll have that, honest conversation about how within the diaspora, like the way that you arrived in a country like the UK versus the US, how that does play out differently. And the fragmentation talked about as the result of slavery is definitely 100% a unique experience. And I don't mean unique in the positive sense at all. Right? The kind of fragmentation, kind of like psychological and economic and physical trauma and breakdown for generations that happened because of that. And I think the particular brutality of slavery in the US and other, places in the Western Hemisphere, that psychological damage is still playing out, fortunately, right?
For sure. But then that's not to dismiss the impact and the legacy of colonialism on those who actually came to the UK. Do you understand? Right. So they came with a particular mentality as well, that was embedded, that again really did venerate and recognize that white supremacist point of view, that ideology and how it actually manifested. So it's still there, and there is a scholar, an academic here, Deborah Gabriel, who I've been trying to get in contact with, and I think she's probably one of the few that has actually gone to quite some depth and quite some length to actually really give the subject of colorism the sort of thorough academic rigorous investigation and discourse that it deserves. And in that, she actually charts the experiences, of those who came from from Jamaica specifically, because I'm guessing that's her island, and the fact that the colonialist mindset that they brought here also meant that colorism was still insidious, but I suppose it was something that, because of the wider context of the society that they were in, as I was saying, just after World War II, the impact was completely different. The way that it looked and felt within that wider context of the UK then it is not to be compared with the way that it played out, for the Americans, so the Black Americans, for example, who were sort of post-slavery, is what I'm getting at. So we can't necessarily draw parallels to the historical context that each group found themselves in geographically.
Mm-hmm. Right. And because I think the one connection, though, is that slavery was part of what colonialism was, right? So when we look at the impact of colonialism, how it was a branch of that. And so colonialism being, that umbrella thing, right? That imperialist drive, these European to dominate the rest of the world, and capitalism being very much a part of that, right? And how it has damaged the infrastructure, right? For, Africa as a continent, but also North and South America, and particularly for people of African descent. And then Knits, Stitches, and Blocks, hey, welcome, says, I would say that colorism within the community was brought over with them from the Caribbean. So I think she's talking about people who migrated to the UK from the Caribbean, where they brought
Exactly.
ideology with them.
Yeah.
There's one question here, which I think is definitely related about some of your earlier experiences with colorism. From I am Latha Simpson. I hope I said that right. Interested to know whether you experienced colorism within the Black community or more from external races.
It's definitely within the Black community. I think probably helpful to sort of make that distinction in terms of the conceptualization of colorism for me as something that is intraracial. So it sits within the specific racial, if you like, group. So for me, the experience was very much from the Black community. I do understand, from that question, that there is an aspect where you could say, okay, well, if you see within the metastructure of white supremacy within the UK and how it functions, let's take, for example, a job prospect or opportunity, where you could say, is somebody who is has a greater proximity or closer proximity to whiteness, are they more likely, to be favoured for an opportunity than I am? But I haven't, if I'm being honest, I can't really say that has been my experience. I haven't really firsthand had that experience. So I think it would be, just a bit disingenuous for me to kind of say that for the sake of having something to say. Do you get what I mean? So for me, the experiences have been within the Black stroke African community, in the conversations, in the language. So I've got I didn't tell you this last time, Dr. Sarah, but I've got a elder sister who is very, 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 very fair, as they would say, and I reflect back on childhood, and just the way that she was handled with such sort of care and concern and love, and it's interesting. And I'm not saying that I didn't get that, but you could see there was some sort of exceptionalism, that was at play for ultimately what can be sort of narrowed down to a matter of complexion, a matter of hue, so it's always been within the Black community. It's always been within the Black community.
Yeah, and I think that's so important because, well, for one, I want to acknowledge that piece, right, about you having an older sister who's lighter than you, because, hey, me too.
No, exactly.
And see, that's more obvious to me. I think being a girl and having a sister who's also a girl, and because the comparison was even more direct, right, between the two of us. And I say for a lot of people, when we have siblings, especially sisters, like if there's a group of sisters who are different skin tones, I think the colorism is so obvious, right? Because you can't other factors, right? We have the same upbringing, same household, in many cases, the same parents. And so the only distinction you would be making is based on how we look, is based on the skin, right? Because it's not like my parents couldn't afford to buy me nice clothes because we have the same parents. So you're not judging me because you're not judging me, right? We have the same upbringing. And so that makes it that obvious. But I also think I actually like hearing you say that you felt it most strongly amongst Black people, because I've said before that not all Black spaces are safe spaces for all Black people, right? And I think that's hard to acknowledge, right? We try so hard to just be united and like lift people up, right? Say, pro-Black everything, which is still true. But if we don't acknowledge the ways that we hurt each other, then, there's a real danger for darker skinned people, other marginalized groups of Black people who interact in these spaces without being.
Absolutely. Do you know what's so interesting, Dr. Webb? I'll tell you what's so interesting about what you just said is, that there are pro-Black spaces, but I find that sometimes they're actually the worst offenders, and that it is a massive blind spot because, it is something that is very much almost in the fabric now of DNA. So it's so taken for granted that even those who attempt to be, at the sort of pinnacle of consciousness aren't immune to it. They're not immune to it, essentially, whether they choose to admit it is quite a different thing. But I genuinely have actually seen, those who are sometimes at the forefront of Pan-Africanist movements and so on and so forth. You mentioned, do you remember about the HBOs as well? So, there are so many examples where we would expect, those who we potentially would hold to a higher standard to really do better, and they fail, but it is one of those things that until we are actually able to confront it, and really be honest about it, it remains that impediment that just doesn't allow us to really realize a lot of the ambitions that we have as a community.
Exactly. Yes. And I think so. Quickly, I'm going to get to the Black Knowledge Society because I want folks to know all about it. And actually now I just lost my question. So let's jump right into that because I was gonna, I can't remember. But you decided to, are you getting notifications?
Apologies, I've just silenced it, sorry.
You're in demand. People want your but so you have created this platform, right, where people can learn about their history, can learn about Blackness in all the heroes. I don't know if people like that word, but all of the people who blazed the trails before us, right? And even bringing that into conversation with contemporary people who are doing that work. And us about how that started. What was the seed or the genesis for the Black Knowledge Society?
Sure. So for me, I suppose a year to today marks, the terrible, awful anniversary of the murder of George Floyd. And it was just a case of, what should I say? It was a response. I took it for me as an opportunity to participate in making a difference. And very, very simply, I just thought, okay, well, how do I put my abilities to use? And at the same time, it was very much also about how can I just sort of express how I'm feeling right now, because like I said, for me, the creative space is a space that I have a lot of affinity with. I'm very comfortable in that space. So writing for me is definitely a way that I release, a way that I heal, and a way that I'm able to then refocus. So that's really how it started. And it was a case of, rather than, because at that point in time, there was a great amount of noise and clamour because people were understandably angry, frustrated, devastated, in a state of grief, saddened, distraught, traumatized, all of these superlatives. But for me, it was more about, okay, well, how do we actually channel that in a productive way? And how do we make sure that other people at the same time have an opportunity to also channel whatever they're feeling in a productive way, and in a way that doesn't necessarily precipitate in, you know, more violence, more anger, because I think the important thing is to find a way to move forward always, you know. So that really was the beginning, and it was just a case of literally sharing those expressions with close friends and family, and then really just receiving a positive response, and then really then just building on that. So just building on that, and here we are, sort of nine editions in now, and still going strong, and at the same time just really manifesting and I suppose modeling what it is that we really want to see, which is that unity, which is that honesty, which is that vulnerability, you know, words that aren't often associated or sort of synonymous with us as a people generally, and really trying to model that, because I think it's all good and well, you know, carrying a megaphone and sort of shouting that we need to come together and Black Power and so on and so forth. But I think, you know, the real keys that unlock the doors are in the action, in the doing, you know. So I think that's what this is. This is just us doing what we can to contribute to said desire for revolution, you know. And I wholly embrace words such as revolution, words such as you know, subversive. Why? Because we clearly recognize that the system, the status quo, that is white supremacy and you know, capitalism, is absolutely biased, is absolutely there to set us up, you know, as the underclass. And where there is that injustice, we have an absolute responsibility, because we all are sovereign individuals. We all have a sovereign right to exercise the authority and power that we all have inherently. So it's for us to basically do whatever we can within our own abilities to respond to that call. It's just as simple as that. I overcomplicated things for a very long time, and I found myself seeking approval from a system that would never ever validate me. Do you get what I mean? So it's just like, okay, well, let's step back. Let me operate within my realm of autonomy and agency. And this is where I found myself, you know, and I just give thanks. I give thanks, and I give thanks for people like yourself, like I said, who absolutely emboldens me, and then gives me that courage to speak out. So yeah, it's been wonderful meeting people like yourself, the doers, you know. That's it. It's not complicated.
I love when you talked about your realm of agency, because I think we do, and people want to know what they can do, and a lot of times we imagine it has to be like this big cataclysmic thing that we're personally responsible for. And I think thinking about it through the sense of agency, and that you have choice. You do have choice, right? They might
Absolutely.
not choices. They might not be the choices you would have presented, but you have some choice in the matter. And I think your example is great. And I share a similar story, right, as a writer, and thinking about how do I want to respond to the issue of colorism. And so it started with just a blog, and now it's what it is now, you know, and how, you know, through that work, though, the courage for me to post that first blog post, right, and the courage, we're talking about the courage, this kind of work, for you to do that, that's why we're talking now. So that courage, that is worth it, because you then are able to encounter comrades in the struggle, in the effort, which I think is so
100.
And I really want you to talk about, because I want the audience to hear more of your philosophy and, you know, theories about things. But you said you really embrace the term revolution, right? And so how would you describe what that is, what that looks like to you?
How I describe that? Okay. So one of my most common hashtags, I probably account for like half of the hashtags of the revolution will not be televised. What revolution looks like to me, um, I just borrow, and that's kind of, again, part of the inherent philosophy of the Black Knowledge Society, is that we're not trying to reinvent the wheel with anything here. So I borrow Jill Scott Heron's definition, which is to say that it's really about transforming not what's going on external, but what's going on within yourself first. That's where the real revolution is, right? Yeah. So once you've actually been able to reach a level of consciousness of self, you're then able to actually look at the world around you very, very differently. That's the real revolution, because that's when you can actually tap in to that agency, to that confidence, to the inspiration to actually do things differently, you know, without actually seeking permission or without necessarily fear. You know, I think that the most wonderful thing and profound thing about revolution for me is that it really does help you to kind of come face to face with your fears,
Mm-hmm.
and then overcome them. Do you get what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Not all, not all, but I think for me, that is what the revolution has been about. You know, overcoming a lot of the fears and uncertainties, and literally just plowing through, purely because I've come to a place of knowledge of self that has been transformative. You know.
Yes.
Ooh. You're taking it to church in the spirit.
Yeah. Okay. Because it feels so good to like hear that like, articulated out loud from, you know, someone who looks like me, right? And knowing how, like you said, the system was definitely set up, structured, masterminded to position us beneath in terms of the hierarchy of social class and social status and beauty standards.
Absolutely.
And all these things. And so for Black people specifically, right? Like white people need a revolution too, right? Like Asian people need revolutions, like the world needs a revolution.
Absolutely.
But when we think about the amount of hurdles and roadblocks that have been put in our way as Black people specifically, and even thinking about the fact you talk about knowledge of self, how the perceptions that so many Black people have of ourselves was written in racist textbooks, was written in racist cartoons or racist films, right? And how even just the struggle to even have a sense of self knowledge, right? And like where that begins, and how that was intentionally, not only intentionally kept from us in terms of who we are, but also intentionally misrepresented, right? So not only are we going to hide the truth of your history, we're also going to feed you lies about that history, right? And tell you that you were stupid and savage and you couldn't do this, right? And so I think everything you said, like knowledge of self, which platforms like the Black Knowledge Society can help people unlearn the lies that they learned in their history classes or just from watching TV, right? And to rediscover the truth about the brilliance of Black ancestry, right? Of all that the continent has and had and still has to offer in terms of creativity, right? Your lane there, but even in terms of the maths and the sciences and the histories and the astrologies and all these different things. Yeah, and so I think for me too, that's why I'm so excited to see a platform like yours exist. And I know people people step up, right? So I commend you for stepping up, right? And anyone else who's watching you way, right? I think that is what we need more of. And so I commend you for tackling your personal revolution and like getting your hands dirty, right? And not being, you know, just submitting to what already exists.
For sure.
I like distorted and misrepresented. Um, we have so much unlearning to do. So we're at 2:40. I actually have an appointment at 3 o'clock, so I can't go over even if I want to, like some house, you know. So I want to remind have questions, so start putting them in the chat now and we'll go back over them. But I might have to bring you back on because, you know, there are questions that we still need to get to in terms of your own personal revolution, Esther. How did you start to, or how are you currently working to unlearn some of the lessons or the narratives about being a dark-skinned woman of African descent?
What I must say before that, Dr. Sarah, is that me being a woman of dark-skinned descent has actually hasn't really been something that I've necessarily overly struggled with. I've had experiences, you know, where I've definitely felt it. But what I would say is that, sorry, I've got some distractions in the background. But what I would say is that the journey for me that I'm on now is only serving to effectively clarify. You know, it's so for me a big thing that I always say, and Aletha, who's on here now as well, will tell you that for me clarity is key. And what they've done to us over centuries now is to really, you know, scramble our mental state to a place where we lack that clarity to be able to really think and actually forge a way forward. So what I've done in order to actually access that clarity is to just tap into the resources that are there. So I have, you know, participated in African history courses. I have engaged with a number of people, because the other thing that I didn't mention is that as much as the Black Knowledge Society is for the community, it's also for myself, you know. So it's as much an altruistic endeavor as it is a selfish one, if that is even possible. But a lot of the learning that I'm doing is actually right here, right now, with the likes of yourself, you know, with so many other contributors that have come on within their sort of respective areas of expertise. So in me, you know, taking that step and choosing to, you know, accept this path of revolution, I'm coming into contact with so many brilliant, beautiful hearts and minds that are opening me up to a place of restoring and healing, you know. So yeah, that really is it. Like I said, I feel that society makes things appear a lot more complicated than it is. Like this stuff really isn't complicated, and I think that is one of my sort of foundational positions with the Black Knowledge Society, is that it's really about trying to democratize knowledge and information, and not having all these sort of gatekeepers in the way, saying that you need to have a dashiki or you need to be this. You know, the only prerequisite is that you have a desire, you know, to grow and to learn, and to, I suppose, enter a completely new paradigm of how you understand yourself and your community. And you only do that by choosing, like you said, making a choice to step out of the matrix, as they say, you know. So that's just what it is, you know. And it will take different things to trigger different people to take that step, but this is just mine, you know. Anything, it can be something that for example happens at work for somebody that is their moment, you know. So it's really open for everybody and anybody. It's a very, very democratic space in terms of what we do, and like I said, it's very much for myself as well as the community. So
Love it. Um, so we have this one question.
mm.
Share it. From our neighboring one. Will you all run for president and vice president in 2024? That's just a fun question. I don't think I'm qualified to run for president, to be honest. But I could put my name on the ballot. Like, if some of the people who put their names on the ballot put their names on the ballot, like, why not just do it? You know what I mean? And it's
Yeah.
first, like, international president, you know?
Well, yeah, exactly. Quite. Yeah. No, I think as I said in one of my posts, for me, it's very much about internal affairs first and foremost. Let's deal with the internal affairs first. Let's get those resolved.
And I think it's interesting. Internal affairs is such an interesting way to put it, right? Because I feel like when I talk about colorism healing, what I learned when I started this work was that it's really just healing, right? And there are so many aspects that intersect with colorism, right? Like my gender, that get healed as well, right? As we start to do work, when we do racial healing, when we do healing around colorism, it ripples out to all areas of our lives, right? And so I think any work that you do is going to benefit you in terms of colorism as well, right? So if you go to a program to talk about, surviving domestic violence, right? Focusing on that healing around domestic violence is going to increase your confidence about your skin tone. It's going to increase your confidence about your body. And so all of the work matters. All of it matters. I focus on colorism, but any area that you're currently focusing on or choose to focus on in the future is going to have a compound and benefit you in the long run.
Absolutely.
Spells says, how do we have conversations with our children about colorism? And I think this is a great question for Esther, because you actually have children. I don't. So it's like medical. I try to use like my background as an educator, a teacher, and as an aunt, right? But you kind of share, like, what are some things you're doing with your children, or that you might do in the future, or that other people can do?
Do you know what? I definitely defer to you on this. You probably don't remember, but when we had our conversation, you actually answered this question. And I thought it was an absolutely bang on answer. So I'm gonna very much defer to that, which is to ensure that, in terms of how you are raising your children, you just need to be conscious. So again, it's just about that consciousness, and making sure that you are ensuring that your networks, the people that you actually engage with and your interactions, that you're demonstrating the behavior, the positive behaviors, and the consistent behaviors, because essentially that is what they absorb. It's very easy to say that it's purely in the language, but no, there's absolutely so much more that comes with socialization and how we communicate. So I think it's very much about, what are your interactions like with people who look like you, who may be a few shades lighter or darker than you, because again, even the when we talk about colorism, it's both ends of the spectrum. So you could, as a dark-skinned person, sort of inadvertently be passing on this belief or this concept that lighter-skinned people are better, than you, to your children, in the way that you actually interact and behave with them, by, in a sense, looking at yourself as less than. So I think it's important that in terms of how you actually carry yourself and how you interact, that you're holding yourself with that level of esteem, within your interactions. Because I think a lot of the time, if we find ourselves, and I think you said it in one of your other lives as well, over complimenting, you know, the fairer skinned person. I mean, we don't, that is exactly what I'm saying about the opposite end of the spectrum. So as to diminish yourself. And if your child is seeing that, then obviously by osmosis, they are basically taking that on, you know? So it's about being conscious about both the negative and also how you use the positive language and who you're actually using that positive language to venerate or uphold, you know? So I think those are the areas that I would say are very important.
Yeah, I agree. I think that was a great, encapsulation of the importance of leading by example for children, right? Because I think a lot of people don't know what to say, right? People don't know how to have like a direct conversation about it. So I want people not to underestimate the power of your example, right? So if you're still in a place where you're struggling to find like explicit words or to like have
Yeah,
an outright conversation, know that you're still teaching your children by the way you act. You're still teaching your children by the way you carry yourself, by how you interact with professionals in their school, their teachers, their friends even, right? Do you try to keep them away from the dark-skinned friend at school, right? And do you try to push them towards, being friends with lighter skinned people or mixed race people, right? Like they're watching that just as much as they're listening to you in these conversations.
exactly.
Anyone I think who's ready to like have an explicit conversation, I like to start with questions with children, right? Like asking them like, what do you think about your skin tone, right? And are the people in your class, how is their skin tone like yours? And how do you feel about that, right? So I think if we listen to our children before we go in to talk to them, then we'll know what to say, right? Then we'll
Yeah,
have a sense of what we need to say to them by first.
very good point.
Yeah.
Very good point. I think that's one of the things that, so we're in quite a rural part of England. We're in Kent, and you know, my daughter is one of very few black children generally in her school, and you know, I am very, very consciously making sure that in terms of her self-esteem, to the extent that I can, you know, that I am doing my very best, you know, to promote that positive self-image, and really just to kind of again use books. And you know, she will actually say, "Oh, she looks like me," with a smile. You know, and that those are the things that are important. You know, at an age where the I'd say the sort of range of vocabulary and expression isn't always there. You know, little things like that are very, very important cues and indicators as to where that child actually is in terms of how they, in terms of their self-esteem.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah, absolutely. Words of affirmation, and really just making sure that, like you said, having those conversations. There have been a few interesting conversations that I've had with my daughter, but I always do my best to kind of swing it round so that she understands that her skin tone, but more importantly, her colour within the specific context of where we live, is a beautiful thing, you know? So, yeah.
Yes. Okay. So, like I said, I don't want to risk running out of time. So
Yeah.
we don't have any other questions in the chat. So this is like the perfect opportunity to wrap up. And I want to give you the final words. But a few reminders from people. I do this every week. Sometimes I have guests, sometimes I don't, but every Tuesday at the same time, join me. We'd love to have you. We are having this conversation with Esther from the Black Knowledge Society. I pinned the comments at the bottom of the screen so you can follow them on Instagram, but also check out the website. And Esther said there are 9 issues in, so you have a lot of content to go back and review. And now I just want to see what would parting words are if you had a microphone that could, reach the entire world of Black people specifically. What would be a message or a word of affirmation for them that you'd like them to hear or know?
Wow, that's huge. I think, do you know what? I think in terms of whatever you can do to ensure your peace, your well-being, and to basically safeguard your freedoms as a human being, you know, just pursue it, so far as it doesn't impact or cause destruction or damage to anyone else. I think pursue it, you know, because I think that we need to be able to realize what it is that we're here to do. So I think it's important that whatever gives you peace, pursue it, because I think there's always a clue, you know, in life. There are always clues that enable us to begin to operate in purpose. So I think that really is my parting word, because I feel that ultimately we're all here to be active. And what do I mean by that? I believe that it's essential that we fulfill our work of activism, whatever it might look like. It's very, very important that we basically are able to fulfill the work of activism that we've been called to whilst we're here. So that really is it, you know, that really is it. I can't say more than that. And yeah, thank you.
Well, what you said was absolutely beautiful, and I think it is a beautiful charge to give to everyone watching, either live or watching the recording. Yes, this will be saved on my IGTV. I'll also share it to YouTube tomorrow, hopefully. But definitely, you know, this is a conversation I want everyone to continue, right? So have your own conversations, as well as continue to explore everything that Esther and the Black Knowledge Society is doing. There's so much more there. And I know we just scratched the surface in this, you know, 50 minutes. So I want people to definitely follow this conversation again. But until next time, everyone, I hope you enjoy the rest of your week. I hope you,
Thank you.
have a great evening or morning, wherever you are in the world, or, you know, what time you're watching this, because if you're watching the playback, it can be any time in the day. But love y'all so much, and thank you for always engaging, being here. Just your presence, everyone, is a blessing, right? You are valuable, and you matter to me, certainly, but in the world in general as well. I'm going to read these last few comments. To teach our Black African kids that Adam and Eve were Black, Cleopatra was Black. We need Black history in our schools and online teaching. Great informative conversation. Thank you, Esther and Dr. Sarah. Great conversation, ladies. Thank you. A great conversation. So there we go. We have appreciate.
Thank you.
Take care.
Appreciate you. Take care. Bye. Thank you. So much love. Thank you so much, Dr. Webb.
Absolutely.
Later.